Last week we covered who needs research, and by now you should answer all of us. Anybody going into the classroom, anybody going into education is going to need research. We need research and best practices. We need to have high quality teaching to be the most effective teacher we can to be in our classroom to help our students. And one of the things that we're going to talk about this week is meaningful learning. So when we're in the classroom doing the best practices and following all the research, we have to develop models for instruction that will convey meaningful learning. So meaningful, I think we know the definition of that, right? But do you know the definition of learning? So psychologists and educators alike have come across one definition that we use for, let me get that out of the way. There we go. That we use for defining learning. So learning is a relatively permanent change in knowledge based on experience. So permanent, meaning long-term or lasting, a change, a difference in an altered state of being, and then knowledge is a cognitive representation of something, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject, and then based on experience. So if you think about it, learning is something that's going to happen a long time. It's going to change the way we think by what we experience in the world. So learning really has a lot of variables. So permanent and long-lasting. Is everybody's long-lasting the same? The change. How can we change something if we don't know where we started from? We all have different background knowledge. And changing, how much change happened? How many neurons were triggering? How much did we remember? Knowledge, cognitive representation of something. So the thinking of an idea. So adding a change that's permanent to our thinking based on our interactions in the physical world. Don't we all have different interactions with our physical world, even if we're experiencing the same situation? So learning is defined the same for everybody, but everybody's learning is going to be different. Everybody has different background knowledge. We have different connectors to connecting what we know and what we do and what we see in the physical world to what we're thinking about now. So yes, this is the definition of learning. And it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, like now that you think about it, everybody's is going to be a little bit different. So in our classroom, we're going to think about how we are going to use that idea of meaningful learning and put it into our practices, right? Methods of instruction. So we're going to go over 3 basic theoretical approaches in the next couple slides. And throughout the week, you're going to be hearing these things: behavioral, cognitive, and contextual. They are all leading to instruction. You can instruct students in any one of these ways, but which one is going to give them best meaningful learning for that student? So let's look at behavioral first. So a behavioral approach is the response and strengthening, and it's kind of like the stimulus and the response. Something happens, there's an outcome. So for instruction, we are giving direct instruction. We are hoping for a direct answer. Nothing fancy in between. Just here it is, here's the answer. So it's a very direct path. And sometimes we think of this as like drill and practice. So if you are a 3rd grade math teacher and you're doing multiplication tables, so that 3 times 7, how you instruct that 3 times 7 concept, the same outcome is going to be every single time. It's going to be 21 every single time. So you have instruction, you have the performance outcome. Instruction, you tell them this, you show them this, and how you're directly teaching multiplication tables, they have the same performance outcome. It's going to be the same answer every single time. And we think about this as a psychological part of it as like almost the Pavlov's dog. And I know you know that experiment we're talking about. Something happens, direct response. Here's the bell, starts to salivate. We know something that's happening one time is a direct response to the outcome. Same kind of teaching here. So is this the best way to approach some of our students for meaningful learning? Maybe, depending on what we're teaching and what age group we're teaching, right? Okay, the next one. The cognitive approach. This one, if you notice, my box has got a little bit more. I have more boxes than just the direct pathway. And this one's going to be explaining the relationship of instruction and the learner's characteristics, and then we're going to go through a process. So cognitive approach, we have the instruction, right up here, and how I instruct that, totally individual. Learner characteristics, totally individual, right? And then the students' background knowledge, what they understand, what they have for physical, experiences in the physical world, based on what they know, what their background knowledge is, and they're going to mix that with your instruction to get that learning process. The learning process, this is where we're going to talk about short-term memory and working memory. So we have something and we're going to combine it with what the students already know. They're going to come up with encoding this process into their brain, and so they can remember it, and then they're going to put it to long-term memory. That's where that permanent change comes in for our meaningful learning. Put it into memory, and then we have to perform something from it. So can you think of something that you would have to go hear something instructing, learn something, encode it, put it in memory, and then perform it? This is like lecture and textbooks. So the instructor is going to be instructing, giving information. The learner characteristics can be, there's so many variables. They can be like, how big is their long-term memory? How big is their short-term memory? Are they having processing slower or faster than others? How is reading skills, comprehension skills, listening skills, focus skills? Do we come from a culture that's not native to this language that they're learning this new information in? Is there some type of physical or emotional or mental disability blocking that learning path occurring? Could be a million different things, right? So if we have the instruction, the lecture, the characteristics of the student, which could be a variety of things, and then we come to the learning process, it's going to look different for everybody. Everybody's getting that same instruction, but not everybody has the same characteristics of each learner. Is going to be different. Go into our working memory, go into our long-term memory, and that performance is going to be maybe performing in a test or a project or applying their knowledge that they're learning into some type of scientific research. But it has to start with good instruction. Mix it with what the student already knows and their characteristics. They'll come up with that learning process. Learning outcomes is where it gets to long-term memory. Use that information to perform. So recognizes learners' characteristics in combination with the instruction. So if you are planning on teaching this way, please always remember that learner characteristics is going to be absolutely different for every single kid in that classroom or student, adult, depends on who you're teaching. Okay, the next one and last one we're going to talk about today is the contextual approach, the knowledge instruction. And if you notice, my boxes got even a little bit more than we had before. And this comes more on the teacher. So if you notice my two boxes that are different here, so the instruction as intended and instruction as implemented. This means what we hope is going to happen in our classroom sometimes doesn't always happen in our classrooms. Let's take, for instance, first-year teachers. So the lesson plan is beautiful. It's all typed out. You know exactly what you're going to say, but the students come in and nothing goes as planned. And our instruction that we meant to teach the students is not going as well as we had hoped. So are our students getting that information? Maybe not. And so we're giving low-quality teaching because of experience, just the culture of the room that day, like who's coming in. Maybe there's a visitor, maybe our children just come back from recess versus the library. I mean, could be a million different things, but your instruction as intended and instruction as implemented can be very different. Then you add that combination to the learner's characteristics that we just spoke about earlier. That leads to our learning process, short-term memory, coding, goes into our long-term memory, and then we take that information and perform with it. Now, this is where it really is important about teachers having high quality and low quality instruction. We know that makes a difference. That's scientifically based. We know that. We know best practices are the best way to teach. But even the most seasoned teachers has days when things meant to go in a certain way and they just didn't. Now, if you have students who can bounce back from that, who are, have great background knowledge or pretty strong readers, or people or students who are really great in school, this type of instruction doesn't matter. They may get what you're talking about anyway. It's those low-level learners or those who come in with maybe some background knowledge that hasn't been in place yet. They're missing a couple steps in their reading or comprehension skills. And then we come to that. And if we're giving a student that is in need anyway, low-level instruction because of whatever reason, it's not going to work. We're not going to get to this performance outcome as we thought. So it says recognizes learner characteristics, which we did, in combination with our instruction, which we did. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. We're hoping for more good than bad, and implemented with a particular environment, meaning that it does not always work the way we want it to work. Take this class, for instance, right? So this class would look very different if you had an in-person class. Since this is an online class, you're seeing things through video and it's not an interaction with the instructor. We're not talking, we're not conversing, we're just giving information and you're processing it. So, instruction as intended, the intentions are good. Was it implemented the right way? I don't know. We'll see. So by this time in the game, you really are good learners. I mean, nobody comes to college in the, 200 level section of an ed psych class if you don't have those great resources available to you. But if you could think about students who are a little bit younger than you, middle of the group, so maybe like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and we have poor instruction, we have students with a little bit of a need, how are we going to get to that performance outcome? So, methods of instruction. Okay, so when we're looking at the view of learning, the influence on instruction, let's go back to that first slide we were thinking about, the response strengthening, the behaviorist. That basically is like, when do we teach this type of learning, right? And we said drill and practice, right? And so the next one, the knowledge and acquisition, information processing. This is more of the lecture, textbook. You give the information, student takes it in, encodes it back to memory, and then performs something. In this one, the knowledge construction, this has got a lot of Piaget and Vygotsky behind it because we're talking about differentiated instruction. So we're changing our instruction to fit the needs of our students. But when we change our instruction, are we really giving the best of what we intended, or implementation might not be there? So that's what we're kind of thinking about this week. When we go into this week's lesson and our to-do list, let's look at this as, how is the models of influence going to affect the meaningful learning of your students? Kind of some big questions. I'll see you in the next video.